Have you ever noticed how lies rarely creep in softly? They march in loudly, dress like truth, hoping that noise will pass for proof? That's what they tried with you. They couldn't stain your integrity, so they tried to weaponize imagination. They couldn't find fault, so they invented one. But here you are, still standing, still glowing, still carrying a light they wanted to bury under a landslide of whispers. That alone makes you rare. It means your spirit didn't bow to the storm of opinions. It means you're part of a very small group who can't be fooled by noise disguised as judgment. This message is an accident. It's a reminder that you are stronger than the smear, brighter than the whisper, and chosen to rise where others have been silenced. And now, you're stepping into a season where their noise no longer works, because truth, no matter how quiet, outlives deception every time. Psychologically, there's no wound sharper than being accused of what you never did, because lies don't just aim for your reputation. They aim for your reflection. They don't just distort your image. They try to convince the world that your very essence is counterfeit. What happened wasn't defamation. It was attempted spiritual erasure. They saw a person who embodied everything they had lost. Peace without performance, confidence without cruelty, truth without theatrics. And instead of growing from that reflection, they shattered the mirror and blamed the glass. Their campaign against you wasn't built on evidence. It was constructed from emotion. Envy served as their foundation, insecurity as their architect, and resentment as their scaffolding. They didn't gather proof. They gathered each other. Crowds don't need facts, just permission to hate someone brave enough to stand alone. They spoke with conviction not because they were right, but because they were afraid silence might expose their lies. They replaced logic with gossip and called it discernment. They swapped reason for rumor and called it intuition. What they really hated wasn't your success. It was your serenity. You carried a kind of peace they couldn't counterfeit, a steadiness that made their chaos feel small. So they tried to rewrite your story, hoping that if enough people repeated it, truth will become a minority opinion. They gave interviews in private circles, recited half-truths as gospel, and treated your existence like a scandal that needed solving. Yet through all of it, your calm infuriated them more than any denial could. You didn't swing back. You didn't beg. You simply kept breathing. And that silence became the loudest rebuttal imaginable. They painted a crime scene around your name, without realizing every brushstroke revealed their own guilt. Their accusations were reflections, not revelations. They accused you of being manipulative while they choreographed entire narratives. They called you distant while plotting in your shadow. They said you were too private because transparency terrifies those who thrive in performance. The irony? Every false word they spoke was a confession of what they were hiding. Their attack wasn't about truth. It was about control. But here's the divine reversal. They ended up indicting themselves. The more they tried to distort your name, the more the light hit theirs. Their obsession became evidence. Their desperation became data. The harder they tried to prove your guilt, the clearer it became that you were never on trial. They were. You didn't have to clear your name. Reality did it for you. Because truth doesn't defend itself. It simply outlives a lie. If this message hit your soul, don't just scroll. Hit subscribe and stay with the light. And now, as the dust settles, the same mouths that once spoke poison can't explain the silence they now sit in. The illusion cracked. The crowd dispersed. The story collapsed under its own weight. People are beginning to see that you were never the villain. They were just looking through fog and calling it vision. You weren't the suspect. You were the mirror. And in a world addicted to false reflections, that alone made you dangerous. There comes a point when your existence alone becomes a mirror that forces others to confront the lies they built their comfort on. That's what triggered them. It wasn't your words, your actions, or your attitude. It was your authenticity quietly unraveling their illusion. You didn't have to accuse them. Your peace did. You didn't have to defend yourself. Your presence contradicted their stories. And instead of facing their reflection, they did what fragile egos always do. They went on attack. Not because you wronged them, but because you reminded them of what they'd buried inside themselves. There's a certain type of person who sees another's confidence and interprets it as arrogance. They see composure and mistake it for pride. They see peace and assume its superiority. Their discomfort becomes the story they tell about you, and their insecurity becomes their evidence. They don't need facts. They only need feelings. Their emotions become courtroom and verdict in one breath. They never stop to ask why your light bothers them, because self-awareness is harder than slander. So they write fables with your name in them, not to describe you, but to protect their own illusions from cracking. Crowds love an easy villain. Gossip is the fastest form of group bonding. Once one trembling voice invents a theory, the rest echo it for belonging. No one asks for proof. They just join the chorus. It's easier to condemn than to question. But emotion burns fast. It doesn't last like truth does. And as the noise fades, the lie starts losing its weight. People begin to notice that the story doesn't add up, that the person they demonize still walks with quiet grace, that the supposed danger never manifested. The truth doesn't shout to be heard. It simply endures until the counterfeit collapses. What truly unsettled them wasn't your survival. It was your serenity. You healed in plain sight, and that was your silent revolution. They expected your bitterness, your collapse, your retreat into anger. But instead, you evolved. You smiled again. You built again. You loved again. And that offended them more than any retaliation ever could. Your endurance became their guilt's reflection. Your peace became their punishment. It's easy to throw stones at someone who's angry. It's harder to live with yourself after realizing the one you try to destroy still radiates without resentment. They couldn't understand why your stillness felt like a verdict. They mistook your calm for arrogance because they didn't realize peace can roar louder than rage. You became evidence of their wrongdoing simply by standing tall. And every breath you took without bitterness exposed their failure. The world expected you to collapse, but you grew instead, and that's the kind of revenge heaven writes. You didn't have to announce your healing. Your glow made the announcement for you. They tried to corner you into proving your innocence, but the real proof was your composure. You could have screamed, fought, or exposed, but you didn't. You let silence become your sword. You let time do the talking. That restraint destroyed them more than confrontation ever could. They wanted chaos, and you gave them grace. They wanted drama, and you gave them discipline. They wanted to define you, but you became a language they couldn't translate. And now the irony burns them alive. They watch the same person they bury bloom in front of the same crowd that once believed their lies. Their guilt festers every time your name resurfaces, every time your peace crosses their memory. They can't comprehend how you walked out of fire without smoke. But that's the difference. While they were surviving off deceit, you were being refined in truth. They built traps with emotion, and you disarmed them with evolution. What they call the end of your story was only the silence before your rise. The moment calm confidence meets chaos, it exposes what's brittle in others. That's what happened here. They weren't observing to understand. They were dissecting to destroy. But there's a limit to what envy can penetrate. You can't fracture what's built from spirit instead of ego. You can't sabotage a soul that's already walked through storms heavier than any rumor. Every attack bounced off because your strength didn't come from applause. It came from alignment. And that truth, that quiet power, sent them spiraling. Instead of admitting their misjudgment, they did what fragile people always do when reality refuses to match their expectations. They started rewriting the script. When they couldn't find cracks, they invented them. When they couldn't expose flaws, they questioned motives. They turned your peace into suspicion, your privacy into mystery, and your discipline into arrogance. It wasn't logic. It was projection wearing a mask of analysis. Their frustration was never about something you said or did. It was about what your existence revealed. That integrity still exists. That authenticity still stands undefeated. They tried to stain your name, but couldn't find ink strong enough to hold. So they mixed envy with imagination and called it truth. They didn't want to prove you wrong. They wanted to believe you were fake, because if your strength was genuine, their excuses had to die. The idea that someone could remain calm, whole, and graceful without manipulation terrified them. They searched your past for failure and only found perseverance. They studied your mannerisms, waiting for contradiction, and only met consistency. The more they looked, the more their story fell apart. And that unraveling drove them mad, because you represent the one thing they could manufacture: authentic stability. If you believe in this mission, drop a $20 donation to keep this truth alive and free. So they built a case the way children build castles in sand: fragile, emotional, and destined to collapse. Whispers became testimonies, opinions became evidence, and jealousy wore the robe of judgment. It wasn't justice, it was theater. One bitter voice became an orchestra of echoes repeating fiction until it sounded familiar enough to pass as fact. Nobody stopped to ask questions. Nobody checked the foundation. They mistook noise for substance. And that's how hysteria becomes law in the court of the easily influenced. But the truth doesn't rush. It waits. And when the noise faded, people began to notice that the puzzle didn't fit together. They realized that for all the accusations, nothing ever stuck, because there was never anything real to hold on to. The so-called evidence dissolved under its own weight, leaving behind only the shadow of their intentions. Those who joined the mob out of curiosity now carry quiet shame, and those who tried to bury you are watching your roots break through the very ground they cursed. Their greatest mistake was assuming that noise could drown out truth. What they didn't realize is that your silence was never weakness. It was preservation. Every lie they told became a brick in the monument of their own exposure. You didn't fight for vindication, you embodied it. And now, the people who once whispered are forced to face what they refused to see. You were never their villain. You were their mirror, and they couldn't stand the reflection. Some people can sense destiny before it ever introduces itself, and that's what terrified them about you. You didn't have to prove anything. The way you carried yourself spoke volumes. The steadiness in your voice, the calm confidence in your energy, the quiet magnetism that drew people in. It all told them you were built for something far greater than their comfort zones could handle. They saw it before you did. That glow they mocked was really their warning sign. You weren't competing. You were ascending. And they knew once you fully stepped into who you were meant to be, no lie, no rumor, no alliance could cage you. It wasn't your past that scared them. It was your trajectory. They didn't even know your full story. Yet something in them recognized the gravity of your purpose. They saw a potential they couldn't quantify, a power that couldn't be replicated, and that frightened them more than anything else. So, before your confidence took root, before your voice matured, they tried to shrink you while you were still learning your size. They whispered against you, distorted your character, and built walls of isolation. Not because of who you were, but because of who you were about to become. Their fear wasn't logical. It was instinctual. They knew your rise would make their illusions crumble. So they tried to destroy the seed before it bloomed. They couldn't stop destiny, but they could try to delay it. They waged emotional warfare disguised as concern, staged betrayals wrapped in smiles, and spread whispers dressed as warnings. All of it was a desperate attempt to keep you from realizing your power. But every attempt at sabotage became proof of prophecy. The more they plotted, the clearer it became that something divine was unfolding in your life. They weren't fighting you. They were fighting inevitability. And when their schemes failed, they turned your pain into a performance. Your tears became their talking points. Your moments of silence became their proof. They twisted exhaustion into instability and retreat into arrogance. They never told the full story because honesty would have exposed their cruelty. So they weaponized your vulnerability, turning your healing process into a headline. What they didn't understand was that every scar you carried became sacred evidence, not of your weakness, but their betrayal and your endurance. They couldn't comprehend how someone could fall that hard and still rise higher. That's why your comeback rattled them. It ruined their narrative. You were never the fragile one. You were the evidence that survival breeds strength. Every time you smiled again, every time you reclaimed your peace, you reminded them that they never broke you. They revealed you. Your existence became their mirror, and mirrors are merciless to those hiding behind masks. They watched you heal, evolve, and ascend while they remained trapped in the same bitterness that birthed their lies. Their obsession was their confession. They couldn't stop watching because they couldn't stop wondering how you kept moving forward after everything they'd done. Deep down, they knew what was coming. The moment the truth would outlive every falsehood. And that moment is now. Your silence wasn't submission, it was strategy. Your restraint wasn't weakness. It was divine timing. They thought they were burying you, but all they did was water the ground where your new self would rise. What once looked like defeat was simply preparation. You didn't have to expose them. Your becoming did it for you. The moment your peace began to speak louder than their noise, their fear became unbearable. They couldn't stand how effortlessly your life began to align, how calm you remained while they spun their webs in the dark. Each step you took toward purpose made their secrets tremble. So they did what the guilty always do: distract, deflect, and distort. The more light you carried, the more shadows they had to hide behind. Every time your spirit rose, it exposed the corners they thought no one could see. So they turned the volume up on their lies, hoping the echo would drown out the guilt in their own hearts. If this spoke to your spirit, subscribe and stand with those who see beyond the illusion. Every rumor they spread was less about you and more about the reflection they couldn't escape. Every accusation they whispered was really a confession. They weren't protecting anyone from harm. They were protecting themselves from the mirror of accountability your presence created. You didn't have to retaliate or speak a word. The simple fact that you remained grounded while they unraveled was evidence enough. They twisted your stillness into manipulation, your focus into calculation, your silence into guilt. But the truth is, they mistook composure for control because they had never seen anyone refuse to play their chaos. Their obsession was never admiration. It was panic. They replayed your name over and over, trying to convince others that you were dangerous when, in reality, it was their own conscience they were running from. Your calmness made their drama look absurd. Your integrity made their deceit obvious. Your healing made their sickness undeniable. And no matter how loudly they tried to shout over the truth, it lingered in every pause between their sentences. They feared your existence because innocence is the one force they can't manipulate. Purity unsettles pretenders. You didn't have to expose anyone. Your peace did that all by itself. While they performed with masks on, you stood as yourself, unaltered, untamed, unbought. In a room full of actors, authenticity becomes rebellion. Your honesty disturbed their hierarchy because it couldn't be controlled, packaged, or sold. They didn't want your downfall because you failed them. They wanted it because you reminded them of everything false about their own success. So they built their campaign of distortion. They crafted half-truths, whispered assumptions, and planted doubts, hoping others would turn away before they saw you clearly. But truth has longevity that lies will never know. Time became your advocate. As the dust settled, the same qualities they used to condemn you became the ones that set you apart. Your consistency outlived their gossip. Your grace silenced their mockery. And now, the light they tried to bury has become the evidence of everything they feared. Because even in a world addicted to illusion, what's real always rises again. They moved against you before you even had a chance to speak. Not because you'd done anything wrong, but because your truth was beginning to pierce through the fog they had carefully built. They could sense something unstoppable forming around you, the quiet certainty of someone becoming undeniable. So they panicked. Their attack wasn't spontaneous. It was a strategy born of fear. Before your light could expose their pretenses, they scrambled to cover the cracks with noise. They needed confusion to move faster than clarity, lies to travel before facts had time to breathe. They didn't wait for proof because the truth would have condemned them first. Their urgency betrayed them. Every rumor, every exaggeration, every whisper was a race against time, a desperate attempt to bury a rising sun before dawn arrived. They knew once your authenticity reached enough eyes, the illusion would crumble. The moment people saw your consistency, they'd start asking questions that would unravel the whole act. So they built walls of distortion, hoping to block the view. But time has a way of dissolving lies like fog before daylight. Now, their noise sounds like static while your quiet endurance speaks louder than anything they've ever said. They once thought they could shout you down. Instead, they shouted themselves hoarse. The longer you stayed still, the clearer the contrast became. The ones who fought hardest to accuse you are now the ones people question most. You were never dangerous. You were clarifying. You didn't attack their world. You revealed its fragility by existing outside it. And that's what terrified them. You didn't crave validation. You didn't ask for permission. You didn't play their game. You simply stood in truth. And that made you a living contradiction to everything false they'd built their influence on. While they were obsessed with control, you embodied freedom. While they were chasing attention, you carried presence. You didn't need to prove worth. You were already walking in it. That's why their fear had nothing to do with your actions and everything to do with your being. Your peace dismantled their posturing. Your stillness mocked their performance. They couldn't comprehend how someone could hold power without noise or manipulation. So they tried to erase what they couldn't duplicate. They plotted in shadows, twisting your image before the light could reach it, hoping the crowd would believe them first. But truth doesn't hurry. It waits. It outlasts storms, slander, and spectacle. Now, the same silence they mocked has become the echo of justice. The same calm they mistook for weakness is revealing every lie they try to hide. You were never the danger, you were the evidence. And the more they talk, the more they expose themselves. Their campaign was never protection. It was confession disguised as defense. And in the end, the very thing they feared most, your truth being seen, is exactly what's happening now, one awakening eye at a time. Their attacks weren't just falsehoods. They were confessions stitched together by fear. Every exaggerated tale, every whisper pass in secret rooms, was a reflection of their own buried guilt surfacing in disguise. When people fabricate with such intensity and persistence, it's never about their target. It's about concealing the shadows within themselves. They weren't protecting anyone from danger. They were protecting their own facades from crumbling. You were never the threat. You were simply the mirror that refused to distort their reflection. You didn't have to reveal anything. Your calm presence was revelation enough. That's why they panicked. Your authenticity stood as quiet evidence of everything false about their performance. They couldn't destroy what you represented, so they tried to bury it under noise. They mistook silence for weakness and honesty for vulnerability. They twisted stories, hoping that the chaos they created would drown out their unease. But the more they spoke, the more the truth slipped out through the cracks in their narratives. Their lies were too elaborate, their emotions too theatrical. Every word betrayed the fear they carried. They wanted the crowd to believe before curiosity could bloom. Yet time, patient and relentless, began peeling back their layers. The louder they screamed, the more transparent they became. People started to notice the imbalance, the absence of evidence, the calmness in your demeanor, the strain in theirs. Questions began to rise like dawn breaking through fog. If this person is truly what they claim, why does the story never match reality? And suddenly, the very drama meant to destroy you became the stage where their own guilt performed itself. You didn't retaliate. You didn't play their game. You let integrity speak at its own pace. And as you continued to stand firm, their fabrications began collapsing under the weight of consistency. They relied on echoes, not truth. They gathered agreement, not proof. They didn't seek clarity. They sought numbers, a crowd of nodding heads to validate the lies they needed to believe. It wasn't justice they were chasing. It was relief in their own discomfort. They found comfort in shared resentment, mistaking bitterness for belonging. Gossip became their scripture and envy their congregation. Yet even their unity couldn't withstand time because truth doesn't acquire an audience. It simply endures. Your $20 gift helps keep the truth shining where darkness tried to hide it. Now, their alliances crumble, their voices falter, and their guilt hangs heavy in the silence they once tried to fill with noise. The same campaign that was meant to erase you has become evidence of who they really were all along. They were never exposing you. They were confessing themselves. Every rumor, every whisper, every desperate attempt to paint you dark only illuminated how much light they were trying to hide. They came at you with venom disguised as justice, not because you provoked them, but because you embodied the kind of peace they couldn't fake. They wanted chaos to define you, so their lies could look justified. They waited for a reaction that would make you look small, messy, or unbalanced, but you never gave it to them. You understood their game, and instead of picking up the pieces they threw, you rose above the table entirely. You didn't compete with noise. You became the silence that made every false note echo louder. That's what dismantled them. Every trap they set demanded your participation to work, and you refused to show up. That restraint, that self-control, that grace, It's what broke their entire operation from the inside out. While they built storms out of gossip, you built calm out of truth. You didn't swing back. You transcended the fight. You turned their mockery into fuel and their schemes into lessons. Every time they tried to stain your image, you responded by shining brighter, not out of arrogance, but out of alignment. The glow they tried to extinguish was never something you performed. It was who you are. The more you healed, the more their chaos looked like confession. They couldn't handle that you emerged from what they meant for destruction with more strength, more clarity, and more peace than ever before. They didn't realize your silence was a strategy, not surrender. They mistook calm for weakness when it was the highest form of discipline. Their entire structure depended on your reaction, and when it never came, they unraveled under the weight of their own noise. The empire they built on rumors started collapsing because your peace made their fury look like madness. You didn't expose them. They exposed themselves through their obsession. They were waiting for you to throw stones, but you planted seeds instead. And now those seeds are bearing fruit for the world to see. Everything they called evidence was projection. Everything they labeled as coldness was focus. Everything they tried to twist into guilt became proof of your strength. They fought with manipulation while you mastered elevation. They played dirty because you were too clean to meet them in the mud. Their desperation became their downfall because nothing they threw could touch a soul that's already free. And when the dust finally settled, there you stood. Not bitter, not broken, but renewed. Now the same crowd that once whispered against you is starting to see through the fog. The rumors don't match your reality. The stories don't align with your spirit. What remains undeniable is your light. Steady, grounded, unforced. The noise that once surrounded you is quieted under the weight of your authenticity. Every lie they crafted became a stepping stone beneath your feet. What they meant for cancellation turned into confirmation. You were never the villain in their story. You were the truth their fiction couldn't silence. Let this be the quiet victory that speaks for itself. You didn't need revenge, attention, or approval. You just needed time, and time has proven everything. Keep walking with clarity. Keep moving with dignity. Keep rising without apology. Because in a world that thrives on distortion, the purest form of rebellion is to remain untouched by the dirt they throw. Your light didn't just survive the darkness. It rewrote what power looks like. And now, every corner of that falsehood trembles beneath the sound of your peace.